A keyframe is a recorded parameter at a particular moment in time. The timeline is the physical representation of those keyframes and where you manipulate and control your animation. Now I've got a basic scene file open here with a cube animating from the positive x-axis to the negative x-axis. I'll hit play on here so you can see what the animation looks like. And so the cube is simply animating across the screen, very simple animation with a little bit of rotation on it as well. So here in the time slider, when I select the cube, I can actually see these little rectangles. And these little rectangles represent the keyframes for that I have set on the cube. Now, I don't normally manipulate my keyframes that way. The reason is that these are really small, and when you have a lot of keyframes on your object, they can become very confusing about which keyframes you're manipulating. So there's actually a much better way to manipulate the keyframes, and that's using the timeline. Over here on the layout button, I'm going to switch to the animation layout. With the animation layout active, I can now see the timeline at the bottom of the screen, and the timeline is the physical representation of the keyframes that I've set on this cube. If you look over here in the bottom of the window, I've got the cube there below this white line, and I've got keyframes at the start and end of my animation. And if I grab the time slider here, I can scrub it left and right and actually see my animation playing. Now this rectangle represents the keyframe information. So at time 0, I know that there's a keyframe on my cube. At time 90, there's also a keyframe on my cube. I can actually select these keyframes and move them around. So if I drag that to the left, I can make my animation faster than the 90 frames that it was. Now my object will travel from 0 to 50, so it goes quite a bit faster. I can also drag this keyframe to the right. And now my animation will hold for a moment and then start to play back and finish, and then hold for a moment more before it loops around again. If I hit play on the keyboard, you'll see that the timeline updates along with the preview range, along with the editor window. Now, the animation that you see is created by keyframes, but keyframes really are just numbers. And the numbers that are contained in the keyframes vary depending on the type of keyframe that you're looking at. Now, in the case of my cube here, I've got position and rotation keyframes. And if I twirl open the cube, I can now see the position track and the rotation track. I can also see a bunch of other stuff in the timeline here that I don't really want to know about. And there's a really great way to clean up this view. Now, in a simple scene like this, there's not that many elements. But you may be working on scenes that have hundreds of objects in it, and you don't want to have to scroll through all of them in order to manipulate your keyframes. You really only care about the items that have keyframes on them already. And so what I'm going to do is go to the View menu and go to Show and Show Animated. And that's going to clean up this left-hand side of the timeline. So now I don't have to worry about all the things there that I don't see. They haven't been deleted from the scene. They've just been removed from the timeline because they don't have keyframes on them. So now I can click on the word position, and I can manipulate the entire position track by moving it around, grabbing this yellow bar. If I take the left side of the yellow bar and drag it to the right, now I'm compressing those keyframes. So I can also click on the summary line, and that will select all the keyframes for all my objects in the scene. And I can drag those keyframes around. So not only can you move keyframes in the timeline, but you can also copy keyframes as well. So what I want to do is I'd like to have my cube animate across the screen, but I want it to pause in the middle of the animation. First, I'm going to slow my animation back down again. So I'm going to drag these keyframes back to the left, drag these keyframes back to the right. Now, navigating in the timeline, if I hold the number 1 key as I drag left and right, that allows me to pan in the timeline. If I hold the number 2 key as I drag left and right, that allows me to scale the timeline. So I can zoom in really close or come back out really wide to get a good view of my keyframes. So the timeline allows you to manipulate your keyframes and control what objects are doing at specific moments in time. And now you've got the basics of adding keyframes and manipulating them there, but there's still a lot more left to do with it. And in the rest of this chapter, we'll devote ourselves to understanding how to do this in a lot more detail.